Welcome back to the Defiant Spirit and the Defy Your Number Enneagram System. I'm Baruch Halevi, also known as B, creator of the Defiant Spirit and the Defy Your Number Enneagram System. I am delighted and privileged that you take the time to check in with my podcast or the video, however you're getting it. Thank you for getting it. You can always jump over to defiantspirit.org to get more on all things Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. I'm a logotherapist. He's the father of logotherapy, and logos means meaning. So it's living your life with meaning at the center of your life, and then bringing that together with the Enneagram, my other passion, and that's really how to live it out in your life. Right now I'm doing a series, if you just jumped in for the first time, on the Enneagram at the movies, bringing to life this ancient personality typing system through the lens of the big screen or also television characters. So you can listen to the previous podcasts on Enneagrams 1 through 4. This one, of course, on Enneagram 5, the Investigator, and we'll just continue on with this journey. The reason why I do this is because A, it's fun. Who doesn't like to watch movies and television shows? And B, when you're watching them, it just gives me a whole new way to think about the TV show or the movies, but also the Enneagram. Brings to life the Enneagram in ways that, words just can't. So Enneagram 5, as I mentioned last week in the 4 and 5 are at the bottom of the Enneagram because they're the deep types. 4 is deep emotion and 5 is deep intellect. They're the hardest to understand. They're the hardest to really kind of wrap your head around. They're complex, especially the 5, because the 5 is the genius, if you will, of the Enneagram. They're just brilliant people. They naturally go to their brain to navigate the world in a way that non-5s just can't understand. I mean, think Einstein, think Stephen Hawking, think basically every great scientist or creator has a lot of 5 in them, or probably were a 5. So 4s are hard to understand because they're just so emotionally complex. 5s are easy to understand. I just don't understand what the hell they're talking about. I can't keep pace with them. But they're one of the easiest types for me to recognize. I was just talking to a friend, Scott, who uses the Enneagram now in his life, and he says one of the ways he does it is by figuring out what a person is not. And that's a sort of process of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not reduction, but elimination. Process of elimination to figure out who a person is or isn't. And I have to do that with like 6s and 3s and other types, but not with 5. 5s I can tell within 30 seconds if they're a 5. Why? Because they're cerebral. It's like you can feel their processing is always happening. Oftentimes the words they use might be just sort of a cut above a non-5. Certainly it's a slower processing speed, so it's more thorough, methodical, but much slower. They tend not to talk fast. They tend not to move fast. They tend not to make decisions fast. They tend to be very conservative with the small c, conserving their words, conserving their energy, their resources, and putting it all to work in one area, their brain. Again, reactive. Responsive, they can learn to look like so many other numbers, but we're talking about caricatures and extremes so that we can really understand some of the important or quintessential aspects of, in this case, a 5. And I just see it says name that 3 above. It should say name that 5. Mistake. Okay, name that 5. Here's a good one to start with. Spock. Mr. Spock. Dr. Spock. Dr. Spock. Spock is the quintessential 5, devoid of emotion. I mean, if you watch Star Trek, you watch Spock, there's like this piece, and every time he's, engaging with people, you can feel it's like there's this withholding of emotion, withholding of resources. There's a conservative nature to a Spock. And it's just true with 5s. They're always conserving. They feel like they're running out of resources. Sometimes they're accused of being stingy or cheap. They might be. I had an uncle who was a 5. And he was really wealthy, but he was known to withhold his resources because, and you could feel it. I can feel it now in retrospect, because he felt like he was always running out. It was depleting to him. And so I do think that there's a miserly component to being a 5, not because they're cheap per se, but because they're constantly guarding against that. They feel drained by the world around them. They're worried about the environment or whatever, not having enough. So they're very thoughtful and conservationist in approach. Who else do we have in here as a 5 that's just kind of like wow, that's a 5. So I don't want this to come out the wrong way, but I think that most psychopaths, no, not psychopaths, sociopaths are probably 5s. There's this disconnect. Again, not all 5 are sociopaths, but I imagine a disproportionate amount of sociopaths are 5s, because there's a disconnect, almost a missing empathy gene. And that's an extreme. Like if you look at like Dexter, or is it Maurice? No, I can't remember. The Silence of the Lambs, but you see him up there. There's this kind of disconnect with Dexter. Anyways, I watched all of Dexter. I loved Dexter, and he was always trying to fake emotion so he could fit in, because he just didn't have access to it. Again, reactive, extreme 5. Most 5s I know, especially sexual 5s, that's a subtype of a 5, and they don't even look like 5s. A good friend of mine is a sexual 5, and he looks more 4-ish. But the stereotypical 5, just you can feel the lack of feeling. And even when they talk about emotions, I've worked with some 5s who talk about their feelings about being happy, or they think about what it means to be happy versus feeling happy. And you just hear it in their language, even the way they talk about it. It comes through very 5-ish. Next to Dexter, if you didn't see this TV show, you might not have. It wasn't really popular. Prison Break. But Michael Scofield, I loved Prison Break. I loved the way this guy thought in the TV show. He was imprisoned and the entire series is about him escaping prison and just methodically doing that. I think Andy Dufresne from Shawshank Redemption was either a 1 or a 5. 1 has the same level of kind of conservative nature, more modest. The Reformer has a sort of a cerebral vibe or feel. They have more access to their emotion, but they're also diligent like 5s, very focused. So sometimes 1 and 5 to me are hard to distinguish at first, until you get to know them and understand them, and then it starts to become apparent that they're very different. But sometimes I have a hard time placing them. So I think back to Shawshank Redemption, I think he was a 1, but I could see the case for being made for it that he was a 5. 5s are able to think 5 steps down the road and anticipate. Great chess players probably are 5s. I imagine Gary Kasparov and what was the kid's name, Bobby Fischer, probably 5s for that reason. I'm looking at Jonah Hill's character from the Oakland A's there, Moneyball. I don't remember his name in the movie, but Moneyball, wow, what a great movie, a great book. I read the book, and it's all about, true story, about how Moneyball changed the nature of the game. I don't know that much about baseball. I don't follow it that much, but I don't know if it's still true. But really just rethinking the emotional decisions and managing a baseball team to a more of a allocating resources more rationally, making decisions based off of numbers, statistics, right? Bringing that into the equation is very 5-ish in nature. So 5s can be dispassionate. You look at the stock market, and some of the most famous investors ever are 5s. I'm thinking of specifically Warren Buffett. I come from Omaha. So Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha was always sort of part of my radar. And I saw Warren Buffett. I knew where he lived. I saw his house and lived not that far from it. Modest house, modest car, modest guy. There's a modesty. You couldn't tell he was the world's richest or one of the world's richest men by the way he lived, because money for him was just a resource. It was a commodity. He traded in it. He didn't need it. It wasn't emotional. And that's one of the reasons why he is who he is, because he didn't get emotionally moved by the stock market. Other people are making decisions based on emotion. If he didn't understand it, he wouldn't invest in it, to the point where he missed some opportunities. But obviously he did pretty well for himself, and partially his reasoning for that was he didn't buy something if it didn't make sense. So fives really need to understand the world, and once they understand it, they can dissect it and pick it apart, and move forward with clarity in ways that we can't if we're getting caught up in our emotions. I'm looking up at the left-hand side. I love that kid from Jerry Maguire. I can't remember much about him, but he felt very five-ish. You know, Jerry, the human head weighs 5 pounds, and bees and dogs can smell fear. He was just spout off these facts that were almost disjointed, and he was just like walking around in the movie, talking to himself, almost smarter than Jerry. But it was lovable. So fives, sometimes get a bad rap. I even did it, calling them sociopaths. They can be warm and charming, and but almost in this detached or nutty professor kind of way. Think of like Doc Brown in the right-hand corner, the bottom. Doc Brown, just a lovable, crazy professor in Back to the Future. Brilliant, beyond brilliant, and yet a little disconnected from reality. I think Albert Einstein had that quality, the pictures of him with no socks or mismatched socks, right? Because he didn't live in the real world in some ways. He lived in his head. I watched it was a documentary on Warren Buffett, and he and his wife grew apart. Well, actually, he didn't grow apart. She grew apart from him because he just didn't respond and fulfill her emotional needs. She loved him. They were always friends, but, they were separated, estranged, but friends. And but one day she said, "Warren, I'm leaving." And he missed like all the signs that she was leaving. Like, she wasn't just going out for the day. She was leaving the marriage. And he basically responded like he always did, like, "Okay, dear." He wasn't listening. Like, he wasn't there because he was in his head and thinking and solving all kinds of problems, and they can become detached from reality. There's a distance in them and in that. So Enneagrams, again, fives are pretty easy to tell, to feel when you're around them. And certainly one of the types that we don't appreciate enough. Appreciate the way they methodically march through the world. Sherlock Holmes, I'm looking at right there. Solving problems that we need solved in a very reassuring way. They can bring us a lot of reassurance. Back to Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha. He's the person we go to when we want assurance that the market's going to be okay, that we're going to find our way, and he'll be the first to tell you the markets go in one direction, up 45-degree angle over time. But you got to zoom out, you got to get past your emotion and really see the big picture, and fives have an incredible ability to do that. So with that, I encourage you to jump in to Name That Five, to take this slide with you into your life, into these movies, into your your family, and watch TV shows with them and explore the Enneagram and discover not only these characters, but each and every one of them in each and every one of us. Until then, discover your number so you can defy your number and live your spirit. I'll see you in the next video.